Dear friends, I want to actually take you to a part in the Bible. How do we handle when we go through difficult times, when we go through some times of testing? For that, we want to look at Job. If you have your Bibles, please open to Job chapter 1. So, we are going to study Job chapter 1 and 2. I'm not going to do a detailed expository study, which will take several days, but I'm going to summarize everything for you. And then at the end, we are going to dwell on that main theme, and then we'll spend some time in prayer. So let's start with Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. So if scholars believe this land of Uz is near the area of Palestine, so around the area of Palestine, that's where this man Job was. Job was a historical figure, and we have his account detailed. I sometimes wonder, if not for the book of Job, how would we even know what is going behind the scenes? You may ask, what is that? So, we have a lot of books like, you have Genesis, Exodus, and all that. But this is the only unique book that tells us something going on in the heavenlies, so to speak, which is not in our realm to understand. So that is why this book is very important for us to understand. Sometimes we go through difficult situations, we go through hardships, we don't know why those things come to us. But here is an example. I'm not saying this is how everything will work for in every situation, but this gives an idea of the things that will happen to us and around us. So there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and shunned evil. So here is a very good description about Job. So he is God-fearing person. So, if you remember the scriptures, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So here is a person who feared God. Sometimes people say, why should I fear God? So it is not that you run away from God out of terror or fear. That is not the fear we are talking about here. The fear of God, when Bible talks about the fear of God, is a reverential fear. You want to put that person at a higher level than you. That is what we worship basically is. So we worship God, and at the same time we fear God. That is a reverential fear. We honor God, so that is the fear we are talking about. So don't get mistaken. So why should I fear God and why should I run away from Him or things like that? So that's not the fear we are talking about. Of course, if a person hides a sin, so they have a fear of guilty fear, and then they fear God, and that's a different kind of a fear. So, but if a person is righteous, just like Job, who was blameless and upright, but why should he fear God, right? So the fear is a reverential fear. And another point to make just before I go to the next one is, so when we fear God, when we honor God, we will run away from evil. We shun evil. So that's what Job was doing here. And now we are going to look at what Job's possessions are. So, and 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. And then in verse 3, also his possessions were 7,000 sheep. I want all our young students to take a note of these numbers. So I'm going to come back and ask you with these numbers. So just keep a track on these numbers. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Camels are used for what? So for transportation and all that. So it's like basically saying he had like so many trucks, or so many cars, or so many the tractors. So he is the richest man of that day, so to speak. So 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, and all that. So all the list goes on there. So I just put it in a tabular format, so I know it's easy for us to take a look at this. So I want you to pay attention to how many sons he has. 7 sons. How many daughters? 3 daughters. And then you look at sheep, 7,000, camels, 3,000, yoke of oxen, 500, female donkeys, 500. So this is just to give you an idea how rich he was. So that is about Job. And he has a very good time, and everything was going fine. And look at what some of the things that he is doing here. In verse 4, and his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day. Somebody is going to say that it could be a birthday. So this appointed day could be a birthday celebration or something of that sort. We don't have to worry about too much on that. So, but on a certain day, so these kids, these sons, they celebrate, and then they invite all their family and especially their three sisters to come and eat with them and drink with them and enjoy, have a party. So that is what they are doing in those times, those appointed times. So it was when the days of feasting had run their course. That means that when the feasting is done, so then Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, and according to the number of them all. Here is a father who is very concerned of his children. So he is looking at their children. Okay, my kids had a party, my kids had a big celebration, so I want to make sure that they have not trespassed any of the God's ordinances. So what is he doing? For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus Job did regularly. Here Job is very concerned that perhaps my sons might have grieved God in any way. So what is he doing? And he is actually taking a burnt offering according to the number of them. So he's burnt offering for us now. We don't have to take a burnt offering for anything. So we can just go to God in prayer. So we need to pray for one another. Of course, the Bible says that too. So we need to pray for our kids. We need to pray for our family. So it just reminds us how much we need to be praying for our children and praying for our whole family. So this is really remarkable that Job would really do the burnt offerings for each of their kids, and perhaps they might have grieved God in any way. This is typical in the Bible. Even Daniel did that. Daniel was praying for the whole nation. If the nation has sinned, so he was praying for the nation, asking God for forgiveness. So that is praying for one another, praying for the sins of not only our sins, but for the sins of the family and sins of the nation as well. In verse 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So when we are talking about the sons of God, so for the lack of time, I'm just giving you the answers here. So the sons of God is angels, talking about the angels. In the God's direct creation of the angels are called the sons of God. We can see these references again and again in the Bible. So the sons of God are talking about the angels. So when the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Why? Satan is also a created being. Satan is also an angel. Actually, that archangel, the prominent angel before the fall. So Satan also came among them. So sometimes people think that Satan was thrown down from heaven because of sin. So of course Satan was thrown down from its position, but still Satan and his angels, followers, had the access to heaven. So that is why we see this here. When the sons of God, the angels, came to present themselves before the Lord, Satan also came among them. So Satan has access to God now in heaven. So what does Satan do? It goes there and accuse us. So another name for Satan, if you read in the Bible, he's called the accuser of the brethren. So his job is to go and accuse about you and me. Do you see this guy? Do you see that guy? So do you see John did this mistake? So do you see, all these accusations that Satan takes before God. So that is the background for this passage. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it." So what is Satan doing? So just going back and forth on the earth, trying to see who can he accuse and then take it to God. So that is why he was just roaming around and looking for someone to accuse. And then I want to tell you, so the reason why I'm bringing this passage is Satan is not thrown down yet to permanent access from heaven. So we see that in Revelation. This is the passage from Revelation. A war broke out in heaven. This is towards the end. In the book of Revelation, we see this. And a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fight. but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the dragon was cast out, the serpent of old, called the devil and Satan. You see the names, different names for the Satan, dragon, devil, Satan, he who deceives the whole world. So that's why we need to be very careful about this Satan. So Satan's main job is to deceive a person. So when Satan deceives a person, so he can take the person's focus away from God. So he was cast to the earth. So this is where permanently Satan will be thrown out of heaven. No more access to heaven. So we need to understand this part clearly. That's why towards the end of the book of Revelation, that's where we see he was cast to earth and his angels were cast out with him. And when he was cast down, he was furious. All that, the time of tribulation, I should say. So and all that. And also one other point about Satan is be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So Satan's job is to look around, how he can devour, like, how can he attack others or cause inconvenience or cause, frustration or whatever it may be. So we need to be vigilant. The Bible says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around like a roaring lion. And then when we look in verse 8, going back to Job chapter 1 verse 8, then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? The background I gave you, Satan goes there and accuses about everyone. And now with that background here, the Lord is asking Satan. So the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? That there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. He really likes when a person fears God and worships him. So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? So Satan is still skeptical, so all this Job was doing is not just because he had real faith in God. He was doing for something else. So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? And then in verse 10 he says, have you not made a hedge around him? Pause for a second here. So Satan clearly tells God that God has put a hedge around Job, around his household, and around all that he has on every side. This is true in case of Job, and this is true in case of us. If not for God's hedge of protection, think about that. If not for the God's hedge of protection around us, Satan will kind of ruin us in any way he wants. So it is God's hedge of protection that protects us, around our household, around all that we have. So here Satan is reminding God that you have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around that he has on every side. You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. So because you have blessed him, that is the reason why he is faithful. That is why he is God-fearing and all that. So because of your blessings, it is really not about you. It is about blessings. So we need to be careful. Sometimes people, when some blessings that God gave are taken away, they said, where is God in my life? So that is what exactly Satan is trying to make a point here. Our worship of God, our adoration of God has nothing to do with the things that we possess, nothing to do with anything that we have. So we need to be very careful. Our devotion to God must be a real one. Really, we need to thank God for who he is, especially when we understand on this side of the cross that what he did for us on the cross of Calvary, paying for our sins. So we need to be careful about that. So nothing to do with anything that we have or possess or anything that we have. So in verse 11, but now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So Satan is throwing a challenge at God. So Satan is saying, so because you put a hedge of protection around him, that is why he is faithful to you. You just take away his hedge of protection, you take away the blessings, he is going to curse you to your face. So see the words that Satan is using. Satan is challenging God that, he is going to curse you to your face. Sometimes we see this. Sometimes people do that, right? So we have seen people like, what did God do to me? So I just don't want to go to church anymore. Things like that, all this. So this is what Satan is trying to challenge God. It is because you have put a hedge of protection, he is worshiping you. If you take away everything, he is not going to do that. So, and in verse 12, the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So God permitted Satan to do some things here. So we are going to see what happened to him or to Job. But with God's permission, those things had happened. And Satan was asking for the permission that, God knows, God has foreknowledge. God knows what's going to happen. God knows the true intentions of Job. God knows that Job is faithful and all that. So he don't have to worry about, what if Job fails? Nothing like that. God knows everything. So God was so confident. God knows everything. So God said, okay, so let's do this. So and Lord gave permission to Satan, and behold, all that he has is in your power, but do not kill him. In other words, do not kill him, right? So that's what it says. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So, and then you will see in verse 13, now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. We studied this earlier, right? So there was an appointed time. They go and do this festivities, and that is the day. Satan was maybe waiting for an opportune time. So so Satan want to maximize the impact. If you look at this whole thing, I'm going to show you that how Satan was maximizing the impact on these people. So especially on Job, I mean. So in verse 13, there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and the messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, when the Sabeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. If they killed all the servants, why would this only servant was escape? So keep that in mind. So here Satan is trying to maximize the impact. Somebody has to take this sad news to Job and tell him. So there is one person that was escaped, right? So he escaped to tell Job. And then in verse 16, while he was still speaking, keep that in mind. So he is still speaking. That means he is still conveying the bad news that Sabeans have attacked and all that. So in verse 16, while he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So here, another bad news. Another person comes in. He came and said that the fire came from heaven and burned up the sheep and your servants, so they're all consumed. If the fire came and burnt all the sheep and all the servants, why would one person escape? So again, it's a strategy of the Satan that one person would escape and tell this bad news, so the impact would be much greater. So as you looked at it, while he was still speaking is the background. So the bad news after bad news after bad news is the progression that we are looking at here. Before I go further, I just want to make a point here. When he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God. So this is the person coming and reporting to Job, right? It is not that, what he saw, he is telling. So you need to understand. Sometimes people say, why is the fire of God fell upon heaven? So why it is not that God sending the fire. This person in the field just saw fire coming from heaven. That means from the sky. So heaven is used as a sky in several passages. So he saw fire coming from the sky, and he thought it is from the fire of God. So that is what he is reporting. So I do not personally think that God is sending this fire. Satan is the one we saw. Satan is the one causing all this havoc. So we need to understand, just because it is written that the fire of God, it doesn't mean that it is a fire of God, because it is, if you look at it, it is in the courts. That means this is what this person came and was telling. So just a footnote there. In verse 17, while he was still speaking, you see that? So he had a very bad news, and then another bad news. He was still speaking. Before he finished, there comes this guy, another guy in verse 17. Another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away. Yes, they killed the servants. In every case, you see, they are taking the cattle, the oxen, the camels, and they're killing all the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So here is again, as I told you, so so there's a one person that escapes. So this is again to maximize the impact on Job, because the news also, there is no gap in between. So one after the other, one after the other, the message comes back to back, the bad news after bad news after bad news. So very tragic news one after the other. So that is what's happening there. In verse 18, while he was still speaking, see, so while he was still speaking, another also came and said, now it's even the terrifying news. So far it's all cattle, it's all about the servants. Of course, that is a big loss. But now this is even going even one step further. So while he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind, maybe a tornado, I guess, came from across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house. And it fell on the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. You see that same story. So this guy escapes and he comes so that he could tell this bad news. Here you see all the kids were killed, all the daughters and sons were killed, and the servants were all killed. This guy escapes to come back and tell Job. So back after back, one after the other. So talking about this, maybe a tornado, the great wind, the Bible calls it a great wind in the book of Job, but we see similar kinds. I do not think it is, again, as I said, this is all created by Satan. Satan is the one causing this havoc on this family, on Job. So we see this one similar incident in the Gospels. In the Gospel of Luke also we see there was a storm on the sea when they started. I didn't have time to go through this again for you now, but I just read this passage. One day he got into the boat with his disciples, and he said to them, let us go across to the other side of the lake. So they set out. When they were starting to go out, there was perfect peace. So because we know that there is nothing like a storm or anything, no consideration of that. And they all sailed. As they sailed, he fell asleep. So Jesus fell asleep because it was peace, quiet, everything was quiet. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water, and they were in danger. So, and they went and woke him and said, Master, Master, we are perishing. And he woke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. So here, I personally think this storm is created by Satan. Think about this. Jesus was taking a nap, and if Satan could kill Jesus, this is not the only instant Satan was trying to kill Jesus. Remember, several times Satan was trying to kill Jesus before the cross, so that his plans will not be fulfilled. So here, if Satan could tilt this boat or whatever they're going on, and then kill Jesus along with the disciples, that's thwarting the plan of going to the cross. So whatever it may be, the point I'm trying to make here is this windstorm is again some supernatural, like Satan created this again. And of course Jesus woke up, and he said, he rebuked it and the raging waves, and calmed the sea. And that is what happened. And verse 20, going back to Job chapter 1, verse 20, then Job arose, back at the news, bad news, bad news, bad news, so much of bad news so far. And killed, the kids were all, the 7 sons and 3 daughters were killed. And all the servants were killed except like there's 3 people or 4 people who came and reported this bad news, right? So those are the people that were left. So everyone was killed. Then Job arose, tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. So here, first thing what you see is he's so much heartbroken. So in the Middle East cultures, even sometimes I see these pictures in in Iraq, in Iran, and when there is some funeral going on, people take dust and throw it on their heads. So that's a kind of mourning. That is what's going on here. So Job tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped God. And he was so much sorrowful. And he said, this is remarkable. So what was Satan expecting? You remember what was Satan expecting? When these things happen, Job would immediately curse God, right? So that was the challenge that Satan challenged God. And here is Job saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. So here is a man with full of sorrow. He lost everything. Let's say whatever his property, estate, everything is gone. And everything is gone. His kids were killed and everything is gone. And what is he saying? Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Instead of cursing God, what is he doing? He's just doing the opposite. He's just doing the opposite. He's blessing the Lord for what has happened. So that is why sometimes, of course, it is hard. I'm not saying it is easy, but sometimes that's why Bible reminds us, rejoice always. So, and then in everything give thanks. It is hard, especially in a situation like this. It is very hard for us to bless God. It is very hard for us to thank God. If we were in the shoes of Job, it would be really hard. But Job was saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. And that is what he blessed the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. So that's why always we need to have a closer vertical relationship with God. If we have a relationship based on circumstances, based of happenings, somebody said this, the happiness comes from happenings around us. So if the happenings change, the things around us change, and we lose our happiness. It should not be like that. We should have this vertical relationship always, as Bible says, abide in me, as Jesus said. So we need to abide in him always. So then we will be able to bless the Lord. This is what exactly happened. You may say, oh, this Old Testament book, which is very impossible for us to do in the New Testament, things like this. No. So if you look at the antiquity, if you look at Paul and Silas, where they were, what were they doing in the jail, right? So where they were thrown in the jail, and what are they doing? They're singing songs and praising God. I know it is difficult on a human level. For you and me, at a human level, it is very difficult for us to do these things. But with God, all things are possible. So that's what I want to remind you. So no matter what happens to us, we should be able to stand and do like what Paul and Silas did. Again, so it did not stop there. So Satan actually failed in the challenge, right? So and then on another day, again there was a day when the sons of God came and present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So because lack of time, this passage we read the same thing in chapter 2 was the repeat of chapter 1 also. This is the second time that Satan is talking to God. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth," that is his job, of course, we know that. And verse 3, "Then the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast." See, now that the first part is what we read in chapter 1. Now God adds something to it now. "And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without a cause." So God is saying, so you did all this to Job, and still he is blessing God. He is not cursing God. So that's what God said. So the Lord takes pleasure in those who fear him, in those who hope in his steadfast love. So I just wanted to show you this. God really takes pleasure in those who fear him. That's why we need to be really God-fearing. So the word God-fearing, as I said, it's a fear of respect, not just of scary fear. So we need to respect God, and we need to worship God in our daily devotion. So in verse 4, "So Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yes, all that a man will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." So Satan is throwing another challenge. So what is this challenge this time? He is now in perfect health. So if you take away his health, so then he will curse you. So of course you are taken all the property, his estate, his kids, still that's okay. But now if you take away his health, so he is going to curse you. So that's the challenge. And now we look at this. So, "And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So God told, so don't kill him, but he is in your hand. So do what you want to do, but don't kill him. So, verse 7, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with the painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. So here is Satan with all the power and going and attacking a person. Think about this. So the worst of worst situation is caused to Job here, if we think about this. A painful boils. There is so much of pain from, it's not just in one place. It's, look at this. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he was so full of these boils, and he was suffering with this pain. And he is actually using a pot shred like this. Some of our kids even may not know what these are. If you go to some countries, you are made earthen vessels. They call it the pots. If they break it, that's the pot shred. So it's just as he's using. Job is using a pot shred with which to scrape himself, because he is now in so much pain and itchy. So he need to scrape that. So he is using a pot shred with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. So that is his terrible thing that's happening. On top of all this is one other thing. On top of all this, what is happening? Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. I personally believe this wife is a very godly person. I personally believe this wife is also just like Job. But now here, what is Satan trying to do with this wife is putting words in this wife's mouth so that she will say something to Job, to even demoralize him, even to bring him down in his whatever he's holding to. So that's why his wife comes to him and said, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. So at this time, I want to remind you, sometimes, Satan can cause some of these things even within our families. Sometimes a wife can say something, or a husband says to a wife something, not intentionally. They may not have even in their heart or something, but sometimes Satan could put words or create circumstances or misunderstandings. Sometimes they may say something, so that would get misunderstood by the other person. How many times that happens in the families, right? You say one thing, the other person completely understands it in a different level. So the point I'm trying to make is, we are dealing with an invisible world, and where Satan is also trying to try to attack us. So that's why we need to ask God to put a hedge of protection around our families, around our wife, around children. So we need to be on a constant asking God to help us in this battle. So here I personally think that's what Satan is doing, putting words in Job's wife's mouth, and then she comes here all of a sudden and says, curse God and die. And then here is the response from Job. But he said to her, remember, he is not calling her foolish person. So remember what he is saying. You speak as a one of a foolish woman speaks. So he is not saying that you are foolish, but what he is saying is that the words that you are saying doesn't sound like that, the real you. You never spoke this way. So now that's why he's kind of saying, you speak as one of the foolish woman speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? So in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Even the second chapter now we see, even with all his health issues, so much trouble, so much pain, even on one side his wife coming and encouraging him to curse God. So this is all basically, we know from the satanic side, Satan want him to curse God. So that even with his wife encouraging, that did not happen. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So very, very remarkable testimony about Job here. And then comes three friends. Now when Job's three friends heard of this adversity that had come upon him, and one came from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. So these three friends are good buddies with Job. When they heard what happened to Job, they were really surprised, and they wanted to go and console him. They came to Job and to console him. Of course, from here on to until the end of the book, there were so many exchanges, so many dialogues. We don't have time to do all that, but I'm just saying here, three friends come to console him, for they had made an appointment together and come and mourn with him and to comfort him. That's why they came. When they came, actually, I think these are very good friends. So, but as we continue to read the story, they acted like as if they are very bad friends. Again, my personal impression is that this is again Satan is using these friends also to put more torment on Job. First, he tried to use Job's wife to curse God and die. And now these three good friends came. And if you look at it, this verse 12, and when they raised their eyes from far off, they did not recognize him. So with all these boils and with all these things, his head shaven and all that, they could not even recognize Job. And they lifted their voice and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. They are really good friends. We can tell from this what's happening here. And they really cried and lamented for the situation that they saw his good friend Job was in now. In verse 13, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Here comes these friends. Sometimes this happens to us, like we want to go to console someone, but there is nothing that we could say to them to console their grief. So we just sat there with them. So that sometimes that is all needed. You just go and sit with them, and that's what these friends are doing. And how long they are staying there? Because the grief was so great, they were there so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him. So this is the good meaning or the good understanding of these three friends. But if you continue to study going forward, I don't have time to go through that. If you read that, even Satan uses these three friends to torment Job by accusing Job. In fact, they came to console, right? So, but now they turned around and they started accusing Job that he might have done some sin. That's why God is cursing him and the things like that. So we can read all that. So before going, I just want, for the sake of the kids, if I have an interaction, I could have asked them a question. Who is the shortest man in the Bible? Right? So he's the shortest man in the Bible. So here, the Bildad is the shortest man in the Bible because it says Bildad the Shuhite. So his height is how much? Shuhite. So anyway, I just want to throw that out. So now let's go to verse 10, the second chapter, and 42, I think this is 42:10. So I just now fast forwarded to the end of the book. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. You remember, his friends came good, but then they started tormenting Job with all kinds of things, and the Lord was angry with them, and finally Job has to pray for his friends. That's the background. And now we go to verse 10. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. So earlier I asked you to keep track of the counts of what this property, the camels, the oxen and all that, because God has blessed him twice now. So if you look at it, God has blessed him twice because he endured all this 42 chapters, what has happened to Job. He endured all that and God has blessed him. And now if you look at it, in verse 12, and the Lord blessed the later days of Job more than his beginning, for he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, and 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So here is the point. So if God said that he is going to bless double, everything double, so here is a tabular chart so you can compare to see what happened. So sons before 7, after 7, daughters 3, after 3. So, but if you look at sheep, 7,000 before, and now it's 14,000 sheep. Camels, 3,000, 6,000. So everything doubled. You can look at the table and tell everything doubled except his sons and daughters. So why is that? So the reason for this is what happened to his 7 sons and 3 daughters when they died. So they went to the presence of the Lord. Sometimes it may be hard for us to understand why did God allow Satan to kill his sons and daughters. But from God's perspective, it's just change of place for these sons and daughters. So they are transferred from one place to the other place. He just took them from one place to the other place. So technically, if you look at it, God has these previous 7 sons and 3 daughters, and now he gave another 7 and 3. So that's the reason why it was not double. So sometimes people say, "Oh, these are all made-up stories and all that." So if I was writing a story like this, to make up a made-up story, I would have multiplied even sons 14 and daughters 6, right? So I would have done that because to make that thing. But the point I'm trying to make is God is true to His word, and Job has not lost his 7 sons and 3 daughters. So when he goes to heaven, he will have those 7 and 3, and then totally he has this double. So I'm just trying to point out God's faithfulness even in that. So with that, I will close, and we'll spend some time in prayer. Let us pray.